The story begins with a crazy scene. The ground shakes violently inside an old, dark, and scary mine. The workers down below start screaming that a huge earthquake is happening. They run in all directions, warning each other that the mine is about to collapse on their heads. Total panic everywhere, and stones begin to fall from the ceiling. In the midst of this chaos, we see a terrified girl running and passing by the men. When she approaches one of them, a massive fire explodes. The entire mine transforms into a heap of dirt and rubble, swallowing everything in its path. Then, the scene cuts to the town square and gets even worse. We see a crowd surrounding that same girl. The guards have tied her up, screaming in her face, saying that she uses black magic. They announce to everyone that she is a cursed witch. The crowd begins to roar, filled with pure rage. You can see the hatred in their eyes, demanding her death, and singing together that this witch needs to die now. Elsewhere, away from the commotion on the VIP balcony, we see Boris. He is a greedy, chubby guy, drinking and chatting with Commander Carter. He says that Prince Roland is too busy and won't even show up for this execution. Boris sarcastically adds that the prince probably won't even get out of bed. He mentions that the prince thinks this border town is infested with witches and is considering returning to the Grey Castle instead of staying in this depressing place. Next, we see Barov, the prince's assistant, walking down the hallway. He encounters the maid Tyra and asks where the prince is. She quietly responds that he is still unconscious. Barov does not accept this. He barges into the room, calling for Prince Roland. He is almost panicking, trying to wake him, saying that it is already very late and everyone is waiting for his verdict in the square. Our protagonist opens his eyes, completely shocked and confused. We see him looking around, totally lost, asking himself, where the hell am I? How did I get here? The prince hears the words verdict and execution and does not understand anything. He thinks he is dreaming, but when he touches his hands, he realizes that it feels too real. This is not just a nightmare. Roland looks at Barov and strange memories suddenly emerge in his mind. He recognizes him, calling him Barov. Barov finds the prince's behavior strange, but insists that he is his loyal servant. He reminds him again that it is time for the execution and that they need to face the crowd. The prince decides to just play along until he understands what is happening. We see him walking heavily alongside Barov, still in shock at being in someone else's body, asking himself, what exactly happened to me? By the time the prince reaches the balcony, the crowd goes wild, applauding as if he is a savior. Roland looks down and fixes his gaze on the girl with a rope around her neck. That is Anna, the girl accused of using magic. Barov steps forward, demanding the order immediately. Roland incredulously asks, wait, is this defenseless girl the witch you all were talking about? He confirms that she is. At that moment, Roland thinks this witch hunt makes no sense at all. He tries to avoid the situation, saying he is sick and wants to postpone it to another day. He tells Barov to disperse the crowd, but Commander Carter quickly intervenes, saying this is no joke. He warns that if they don't execute her now, more witches will appear and cause total disaster. Roland looks at Carter and information flashes in his mind, revealing that he is Carter Lennis, the captain of the Night Watch. Roland smirks slightly and says he shouldn't be so afraid. He adds that if more witches show up, all the better, as they can capture them all at once. Carter and Barov glance at each other, completely shocked by the sudden change in the prince. Meanwhile, the crowd starts to grumble, wondering why the prince hasn't killed the cursed witch. The scene cuts inside the house, where Roland is sitting, trying to understand his new situation. We see him surveying everything around him. He realizes that he is now in the body of a completely irresponsible prince, trapped in a useless and unknown land, amidst an extremely primitive and ignorant society. Roland understands that this era is basically a dark age filled with brutal power struggles among brothers. He begins to wonder what the hell he can do amidst all this chaos and stupidity and what his true place is in this new world. At that moment, our protagonist decides to face reality and accept his fate. He proudly declares that from this day forward, he is no longer who he was before. Now he is Roland Wimbledon, the prince who will completely change the game. We see Roland looking in the mirror, telling himself that since he is there, he will use all the knowledge and science he has to build a completely new and different world. Suddenly, his assistant Barov enters, greeting him and saying he came because the prince called for him. Roland looks at him calmly and asks him to sit so they can talk about something important. Barov begins to speak, and it is possible to see the panic and confusion etched on his face. He asks the prince why he stopped the execution of the witch yesterday, warning that all of this is extremely dangerous, urgent, and cannot be delayed. Roland merely looks coldly at him and asks why then. Barov pulls out a strange coin or amulet and throws it in front of the prince. He explains that the guards found witches in the western forest and found exactly this amulet there. We see Roland picking up the object, analyzing it with complete focus. Barov continues, saying that this amulet is the eye of the demon of the sacred mountain, the official symbol of the Witches' Cooperation Association. Roland asks what the hell this association is. Barov explains that it is a group that gathers witches with the aim of uniting them to find the legendary sacred mountain. Barov also tells the prince that legends say the witches will find eternal peace there. That's why this group keeps trying to turn innocent girls into witches. He even believes that they are behind the disappearance of babies in the port of Clearwater. Roland begins to connect the dots and asks if Barov is afraid that this group will show up to rescue the captured witch. Barov confirms, saying, "These witches are completely crazy and will do anything not to leave one of their own behind." Barov urges the prince to give the execution order as soon as possible to avoid problems, explaining that these witches have terrifying powers and the knights of the kingdom might not even be able to face them. Roland ponders for a moment and then asks, "How did you manage to capture her if she is so strong?" Barov recounts that a few days ago. When the mine collapsed, this girl revealed her true nature and used magic. He says she unleashed a hellish fire that burned a man so intensely that his body and head melted into the ground like wax. At that moment, Roland makes a shocking decision and says he wants to see her in person. Barov is surprised by the request, incredulously asking how he can want to meet her, but Roland stands by his decision. The prince asks why they execute witches by hanging, since it would be more common to burn them, and Barov explains that this specific girl is not afraid of fire, and it doesn't even affect her. When they arrive at the prison, Commander Carter tries to prevent the prince from acting recklessly. He warns him that she is an evil witch, and that the divine punishment amulet she wears may not be enough to keep him safe. Roland looks at him firmly and says that someone who wants to defeat evil must confront it head-on. He asserts that justice should not only affect the weak while ignoring the true threats. Carter falls silent, having nothing to do, and accepts to follow his orders. The scene shifts to the dark, cold corridors of the prison. We see Prince Roland walking among the guards, with Carter and Barov beside him, until they reach the girl Anna's cell. Anna is locked up with heavy iron chains on her hands, appearing completely exhausted. Roland tells Carter to calm down and step back. He approaches the girl, introduces himself, and says he is the fourth prince of the Grey Castle Kingdom. The prince asks for her name, and she replies that her name is Anna. Roland shows interest and asks her to tell her story and what exactly happened in the mine that day. We see the sadness on Anna's face as she explains that her father was a miner. When the mine collapsed, she ran to save him and found him trapped under the rubble. Anna continues to say that another worker took advantage of the chaos to try to steal her father's money. That money was their entire life savings, needed just to survive. Anna tells the prince that when she saw the thief threatening to kill her father with an axe, she lost control and killed him using her magical powers. Roland asks why she was imprisoned. Anna says someone reported her. At that moment, Barov interrupts and tells the prince that it was her own father who lured and handed her over. Roland is completely shocked by how disturbing this situation is, but Barov explains that it was pure greed, and anyone who reports a witch receives a reward of 25 gold coins. Since the father was incapacitated, that money would guarantee an easy life for him. Roland looks again at Anna and asks how such a young girl was able to kill an adult man. Anna bitterly replies that she used what they call black magic. Prince Roland asks her to show this magic. Carter and Barov panic, warning that the amulet around her neck is sealing her powers and that releasing her would be a total disaster. Anna looks defiantly at the prince, saying that his curiosity might end up killing him. Roland counters confidently, asserting that if she truly were a demon, her father would be dead now, not him. Roland moves even closer to Anna. We see him gripping the chain around her neck, telling everyone that he wants to know the truth. Is she an innocent victim or a demon in disguise? At that moment, Roland rips off the magical amulet, and Anna, he begins to unleash intense flames from his body. The fire fills the cell, and Barov and Carter try to pull the prince away, utterly terrified. Carter screams that they need to flee, but Roland stands firm, saying there's nothing to worry about. We see him pointing to the fire that neither burns nor affects him in any way. Roland explains that Anna is completely controlling the flames and does not intend to harm anyone. We see Anna standing amidst the fire with a chilling calmness. She looks at the prince, hopelessly, saying that his curiosity must be satisfied by now, and begs him to end her suffering and kill her right there. Prince Roland confidently walks up to her, saying he is not going to kill her and actually wants her to work for him. Then, we see Roland deep in thought, coming from a completely different world. He begins to reflect on the laws of physics, especially the second law of thermodynamics. He realizes that the witches of this world simply break all those rules, able to create energy from nothing, without limits. This makes him understand that the power of witches is the fastest way to turn this primitive world upside down. In the midst of his thoughts, he hears a knock at the door. His assistant Baroff enters, bows, and says, "Good morning, Your Highness." Roland looks at him and asks if he has completed the task he was given. Baroff confirms that everything went according to plan, saying that the execution of the witch happened exactly at noon. He adds that they completely covered her face, so no one in the crowd realized it wasn't the real witch. Roland is impressed with the result and replies, "Perfect." He then asks Baroff to prepare extremely detailed reports. The prince says he needs a summary of all commercial agreements, taxes, and fixed expenses of the city over the last 10 years. Baroff is completely confused, asking why he needs all that data. Roland gives him a cold look and says he does not want questions right now, just that the work gets done quickly. Suddenly, Baroff's face lights up with joy, saying that the prince is finally taking his father's decree about the throne seriously. Roland begins to think about his brothers and the mission their father assigned to each of them. We find out that his brother Gerald received Cold Wind Ridge as a heavy military base. His brother Timothy commands Valencia, which is basically the economic center of the kingdom. His sister Garcia controls the main trading port of Clearwater, while his other sister Tilly governs Silver City, the largest cultural center. In comparison, our protagonist has been thrown into this border town, abandoned and decaying. Roland directly asks Baroff what his real chances are of winning this contest. Baroff is honest, explaining that his brother's territories have enormous advantages, and that compared to them, it is extremely difficult to achieve any success in this place. He also reveals the harsh reality that the prince's past behavior and his terrible reputation among the nobles give him no advantage in this race. But Roland is already thinking ahead, devising a brilliant plan to secure the throne. The scene then shifts to a castle corridor, where we see Commander Carter waiting for Baroff. He asks what exactly the prince said. Baroff walks past him completely distracted, then Carter catches up to him and warns him that this whole situation with the witches is problematic. Next, we see the garden where Anna is at peace. Baroff approaches her with a paper in hand, saying that it is a work contract. He explains that as soon as she signs the last page, she and the prince will have a completely equal working relationship. Anna is confused by the word equality. Baroff continues saying that the prince himself insisted on this. Then, Roland appears calling Anna and entering the garden elegantly. He approaches her and asks if she slept well the night before. She replies timidly that yes. The prince says he wishes she could rest more after everything she went through, but that time is short, promising to make up for it later. Anna looks at him completely confused as they walk through the huge garden. She starts asking the prince why he saved her, considering that he killed a man and should be punished. Roland explains that what she did in the mine was pure self-defense, and that literally anyone in her situation would do exactly the same to protect their own family. Anna responds hopelessly, saying that even if he forgives her, she is still a witch. Roland then approaches a bush, picks a beautiful flower, and hands it to her. We see Anna admiring its beauty, but suddenly Roland says in a completely serious voice that this flower is highly poisonous. Anna gets startled and jumps back immediately. At that moment, Roland starts to laugh, saying he was just joking and explaining that everyone knows that the flower is not poisonous. He then explains his point, saying that the essence of the flower has never changed. What changed was only her perception based on what he said. He asserts that the same logic applies to witches. From his point of view, her power is like that flower, a product of nature, not something inherently good or bad. But Anna insists that her power is truly terrifying and can kill anyone who approaches. She admits that the church is right and that witches are the personification of evil, even pleading for him to kill her and end everything. Roland just watches her and says that if she really wants to die, that is her right. But he makes it clear that dying is not a solution, it is merely escaping. He then offers her a second option, to help him build a new world where witches can live freely, without fear, without needing to hide or feel ashamed of who they are. A world where they can use their powers to help people and heal suffering. Anna begins to cry, saying she just wants to go back to school, read with her classmates, and sing in the fields. She reveals that her biggest dream is to become a teacher like Mr. Carl, being with children and teaching them to read and write. With a voice full of hope, She asks the prince if that dream can really come true. Roland looks deeply into her eyes with absolute confidence and replies, "Surely, that will happen, as long as we work together." Then we see Prince Roland teaching Witch Anna to control her powers. He explains that she should train in that specific location to avoid drawing attention, and he also says that her main goal now is to have complete control over every detail of her magic, whether it is the exact temperature or the intensity of the flames. He warns to be very careful during training not to end up burning his clothes again or setting something nearby on fire. Soon after, we see Roland in his office, completely exhausted after spending the entire night analyzing reports. His assistant Barov enters and shows concern, saying that he must be very tired for not having slept. Roland then begins to explain what he discovered to Barov. He mentions that he read last year's report and realized that the only relevant industry in that border town is mining. We see him flipping through the documents while explaining that they extract large amounts of stones, ores, and gems. However, the big revelation is that the financial report shows that the city's annual income is literally zero. Roland explains that the profits barely cover operational costs. Even worse, there is no data on the citizens' lives or on taxes. And the most absurd part is that the town has absolutely no agriculture. Roland starts apologizing to Barov for his past negligence, admitting that he lived a life of luxury and parties while leaving all the heavy work to him. But he promises that from that moment on, that is over. He will be a true leader. He asks Barov to stay by his side and help him. Barov becomes excited, swearing loyalty and promising to do whatever it takes. He then alerts the prince about the harsh reality of a huge food crisis caused by Boris. Roland just smirks sarcastically, saying he thought Boris was a decent guy. He concludes that he is probably upset because Roland took his town, but, thinking logically, Roland states that since the border town belonged to Boris, it makes sense for him to sell the ores at a fair price. Barov then reveals the harsh truth to the prince. He explains that Boris and all the nobles who govern this town actually own properties in Long Stronghold, and that all their real interests are there. Because of this, they never intended to develop this border town, treating it only as an extraction site where they came to mine resources and send them to their superiors in Long Stronghold in exchange for a share of the profit. Roland then makes a firm decision, stating that this farce ends at this moment. He orders Barov to immediately halt all negotiations with Long Stronghold and asserts that they will now engage in real commerce, selling all the ready ores directly to Saul City in exchange for money to finally buy grains and food. Barov worries about the possibility of Saul City refusing such a quantity, but Roland offers his brilliant strategy to sell everything at half the market price. He explains that this absurd profit will make them accept immediately, ensuring cash flow for the town and market dominance. Roland continues analyzing the situation and also finds a solution to the monster problem in winter. He understands that to truly establish himself, build his kingdom, and contest the throne, he needs to resolve this problem at its roots. He then orders Barov to summon Commander Carter. Carter arrives with 3 men and explains that they survived the 5 seasons of the so-called demon months in that town. 2 of them are patrol captains responsible for the alert beacon, and the third is a hunter who managed to kill 2 monsters alone. Roland begins to interrogate him about the defense system. One of the scouts, visibly frightened, explains that as soon as they spot monsters coming out of the forest, they light the beacon and flee by boat down the river to Long Stronghold. Roland asks if the river is safe, and he replies that it is, as it is deep, the current is strong, and he has never seen monsters crossing it. The scout continues saying that these periods last from 2 to 3 months and that the snow only melts in spring. He remembers a tragedy from 2 years ago when winter lasted 4 months, causing many people to starve. Roland, shocked, asks if they were in Long Stronghold during that time, and the scout bitterly replies that the city only provided food in exchange for minerals, and that when the resources ran out and the monsters prevented returning to the mines, the nobles simply let everyone starve without helping. Roland then turns to the hunter and asks about the monsters he killed. The man explains that they were a wolf and a boar, originally common animals, but the corrupted fog intensifies their instincts, transforming them into extremely dangerous creatures. He says that the boar's skin becomes so tough that arrows cannot pierce it, and that the wolves become too fast, requiring special traps. Because of this, the walls of Long Stronghold can hold them back. Roland notices something different about the hunter's appearance and asks Carter about him. Carter explains that he is an exile from the Sand Nation. Roland shows respect and says that it does not matter his origin, for as long as he is in that border city, he is one of theirs, and asks him to say his name with pride. The man responds that his name is Iron Machado. Roland then rewards him for his bravery, giving him and the scouts 10 silver coins each, and orders orders them to leave. Then, Roland takes Carter to the edge of a cliff overlooking the entire city. He asks the distance between the mine and the river, and Carter replies that it is about 600 meters. Carter realizes that the prince is planning something bold and directly asks if he intends to spend the winter there. Roland confirms, saying that he will stay in the city along with its 2,000 inhabitants and that he already has a plan. He looks out over the vast land ahead and declares that he will protect the city by building a massive wall that is impossible to cross. Next, we hear Barov's voice talking about Prince Roland Wimbledon's past. He recounts that in the Grey Castle, the prince's reputation was terrible, living lazily and irresponsibly, far from the expected behavior of a noble. He also highlights the huge difference between Roland and his brothers, who were far ahead of him. Barov admits that he only accepted to help him because of the king's promise to make him finance minister after the war. However, his tone changes as he recalls Roland's transformation, stating that it all began the day he saved the witch Anna. At first, he thought the prince was just talking nonsense, but upon seeing him studying tirelessly, analyzing finances, and devising brilliant trade strategies, such as the Silk Route, he realized that he was no longer the same. Roland then starts to devise a grand long-term plan to develop the city, but Barov, concerned, warns that none of this will matter. If they cannot survive the months of the demons that are coming in winter, he reveals that the prince wants to build a gigantic wall, about 600 meters, in just 3 months. Something that, in Barov's view, is simply impossible. Then, the scene cuts directly to the construction site, and we see Holland ordering the workers to bring limestone and clay from the North Mountain mine. He explains that they need to crush the stone, mix it with clay, and spread it all over the ground. Shortly after we see Anna arriving, Roland asks her to use her magic to heat this mixture to extremely high temperatures. Next, he orders Commander Carter to mix a specific ratio of gypsum powder into the burnt material. Carter looks at the prince completely confused, asking what he is doing. Roland just smiles, saying that this is a new chemistry recipe. He proudly states that he will show Anna the magic of science. Roland tells Carter to mix the powder with water and pour it into the gaps between the stones, promising that the next day it will become a solid wall, unbreakable. Anna looks at the prince with total admiration, saying she believes in everything he says. The next morning, we see Carter trying to destroy the wall with all his strength, only to realize that it has become as hard as iron. He is astonished and says that if they use this material, they could build a wall around the whole kingdom in just 5 years. Roland responds elegantly, saying that there are much more important things to build at the moment. He coldly asserts that he wants to build proper houses to shelter the poor and homeless, protecting them from rain and cold. Roland explains that this material is called cement and puts Carter in charge of finishing the wall in 3 months. However, shortly after, we see Roland observing the work with disappointment. He says that progress is very slow and that the wall looks poorly made, likely to collapse with the first storm. Barov intervenes, reminding that Carter is a commander, not an engineer, and that a construction of this size requires an experienced architect. He states that they urgently need qualified professionals. Roland makes an immediate decision and tells Barov to publish job ads in the neighboring towns. We see the ads being posted in the square, offering high salaries. Then, the scene shifts to a man named Carl Van Beth, a simple schoolteacher from the town. He is with a little girl named Nana, who, frightened, says she has also become a witch. Carl tries to calm her down and soon after reads the prince's ad looking for workers, builders, and a site supervisor for 1 gold coin a month. He decides to accept and goes to meet the prince. Barov informs that a teacher has applied, claiming to have experience in large constructions. Roland allows him in, and we see Carl introducing himself, saying that he has worked on dam maintenance, palace construction, and renovations of public buildings in the Grey Castle. He appears suspicious and recalls that these projects belong to the Builders Guild, whose members were executed after the disaster of a theater collapse. Carl honestly responds, explaining that the accident occurred because the guild leader was corrupt, accepted bribes, and exchanged materials for weaker ones. He says he managed to escape the execution, and he came to hide in this border town. Roland understands the situation, decides to forgive him, and hires him as the lead architect. He explains to Carl that he wants to build a wall 600 meters long and about 5 meters high. He quickly calculates and says they first need to dig foundations to ensure stability, warning that with current resources, it would take 3 years to complete. Roland interrupts him, stating that the wall needs to be ready before winter to protect them from the monsters. Carl is surprised and tries to suggest alternatives like reducing the size of the wall. He says that if they do that, they might finish in a month and a half, but the problem would be the enormous amount of quarried stone needed. impossible to prepare in time. Roland just smiles mysteriously and says that if the problem is the materials, then it will be easy to solve. He claims he has a big surprise. We see the two walking as Roland prepares to reveal how he intends to produce stone using cement and Anna's magic. Architect Carl is completely impressed with the result, and Prince Roland proudly declares that this is the miracle that will build his kingdom. Carl begins to touch the wall with his hands, unable to believe that the stones literally fused into a single solid block, impossible to separate. Roland explains that this material just saved them years of polishing and sculpting stonework, saying that literally any rock of any shape can be used as long as they have this mixture. Carl begins to do mental calculations and tells the prince that if they can skip the sculpting stage, the construction speed will increase tenfold. Roland then asks if the project can really be completed in just 3 months now. Carl confidently replies that, thanks to this material, that is totally possible. Carl asks the name of this magical substance, and Roland responds that it is called cement. We see Carl repeating the name with admiration, saying he will never forget. He states that he cannot even understand how chemistry created something so incredible and strong. Roland smiles and promises to write a detailed manual for him later, saying that if he needs anything, he can talk to his assistant, Barov. At that moment, Carl takes a deep breath and tells the prince that he has a special request. Suddenly, we see Anna entering the room. As they lock eyes, both are completely shocked. Carl calls Anna's name, incredulously, and she responds equally, surprised. Roland calmly intervenes and asks if that is the teacher she talked about. Anna confirms, saying that most of the children in the town learn from him and that he is a great person. Carl, humble, says he is just someone who teaches children to read and write, and looks at Anna with great emotion, saying he thought she was dead and has been having nightmares since. He expresses indescribable relief at seeing her alive. Carl then throws himself at the prince's feet, thanking him for his mercy and generosity, but Roland asks him to get up, explaining that from his point of view, witches are not evil creatures, and that he would never obey orders that involve killing innocents. Feeling safe, Carl reveals a big secret. There is a second witch in that border town. The news hits Anna hard, as she cannot believe that little Nana has also awakened magical powers. Commander Carter and Barov exchange nervous glances, realizing that 2 witches in such a small village could attract a dangerous church purification crusade. Carl continues to plead with the prince to have mercy on Nana, as she is still young and innocent. He says Anna was very lucky to be under the protection of a brave prince like Roland. Roland quickly corrects him, clarifying that he did not save Anna to make her his servant, but because he needed her help, revealing that it was Anna who created the cement that impressed everyone so much. Cal is completely shocked by this revelation. Roland then orders Cal to bring Nana to the castle, ensuring her absolute safety. Barov intervenes and warns of a big problem. Nana Pine is not a commoner, but the daughter of Baron Tig Pine, meaning she belongs to the nobility. Holland perceives the risk and orders her to be brought discreetly the next morning, as if it were just an ordinary class. He asks Barov to completely clear the kitchen so they can find her away from the eyes of servants and nobles. The next day, we see Nana entering the kitchen, clearly frightened. Carl tries to calm her down and guides her to greet the prince. Holland receives her elegantly, asks her to sit down, and says he just wants to get to know her better. He offers waffles and sweets to make her feel more at ease. Then, Anna enters the kitchen, and as soon as Nana sees her, she screams with joy, saying she knew she was alive and never believed the rumors of her death. Roland gets straight to the point and asks about Nana's powers. She innocently explains that it all started a week earlier when she tried to save a bird with a broken leg. She says a strange substance came out of her hands, covered the bird, and healed it instantly, allowing it to fly again. Roland orders Commander Carter to buy injured animals to test her power. We then see Nana using the liquid and completely healing a bird. Roland analyzes and concludes that she can heal wounds and broken bones, but cannot regenerate limbs or resurrect the dead. Arthur observes in amazement and says he now understands the prince's plan with the witches. Roland tells Nana to go home for now and to return later for secret training, explaining that if this secret leaks, the nobles will turn against him. Arthur then asks if he really thinks the wall and the witches will be enough to survive the winter. Roland responds mysteriously that yes, but coldly warns that the cursed monsters are, not the only enemies they will have to worry about. One night, a silver-haired woman was watching the moonlight. At that moment, a man enters the room, addresses her as Your Highness, and informs her that the Black Fleet has returned with great loot after intercepting a convoy heading from Valentia to Wolfhart. Upon hearing this, the woman asks to know the name of the captain of the Black Fleet. The man replies that his name is Drake. Yes, like the singer or the actor. The woman turns and orders that he be granted the title of knight and that all the loot be delivered to the Black Fleet. The man thanks her on behalf of the fleet and changes the subject, informing her that the mission failed, as Prince Roland merely dozed off after drinking the poisoned wine and woke up shortly after without suffering any effect. It didn't affect anything, but the woman grows tired of hearing this and orders that they inform him he will have one last opportunity. Furthermore, she requests that they send the sister's belongings so that he can act accordingly. Before the man leaves, she gives one last order: execute the alchemist who produced that poison. Then, the scene shifts to our protagonist's territory. A man arrives at the dock and observes people working, while in the castle, Roland reviews some documents with Barobe. He informs that the wall will be completed soon. Roland asks about the commercial situation, and Barobe assures him that everything is going well, saying that the food from the Sauce Village has already arrived in the territory. He even points out the amount recorded in the report, assuring that it will be enough to get through the winter. He also adds that, after deducting expenses, a small surplus remains. However, even though there are commercial revenues, the fiscal deficit is still serious, raising doubts about long-term sustainability. In other words, basically, they are not doing so badly now. They already have enough food for winter, and there is still a little money left. But the problem is that they continue to spend more than they earn, and over time, this will bring issues. Returning to the story, it is said that even now, most of the expenses come from the treasury. So, if they keep up this pace, hopefully, they will last until spring. Roland reassures him, reminding him that they still count on ore trade, and that if they manage to finish the wall and establish themselves there, production will be guaranteed. However, he makes it clear that his concern is not that, but rather the fact that they have interrupted the ore supply to Canto Largo, as Duke Ryan will likely not stand idly by. At that moment, someone interrupts them, announcing that an envoy from Canto Largo has arrived. In response, Roland orders the servants to prepare a banquet with, food from the Sauce Village for the guest because, after all, one conquers first through the stomach. Thus, we move to the table, where the maids fill the area with various dishes and desserts. The envoy is confused upon seeing this, and Roland invites him to eat. The envoy, named Ermin, observes as he eats with chopsticks and asks what they are. Roland introduces them as hashes, explaining that, as his subjects cannot afford cutlery, these utensils are cheaper and more hygienic, something he would like the entire border town to learn to use. He also apologizes for the limited food, but Ermin replies that it's no problem, as even in Canto Largo they do not enjoy a banquet like this. Roland explains that it is just a welcome banquet, something that does not happen often, but they took advantage of the occasion, since the food had just arrived from the Sauce Village. Ermin expresses surprise upon hearing the origin of the food, but Roland ignores this and suggests they eat first, and leave the business for later. After the meal, Ermin thanks him for the hospitality and states that he came representing Canto Largo, reminding that the deadline for sending the miners has already passed. The food was ready to be shipped, but will not be sent because the miner has not yet arrived. Roland explains that they recently suffered an accident. The northern mine collapsed, and production was interrupted, preventing them from gathering the agreed amount. In response, Ermin suggests that he at least deliver the production for 2 months. Roland recalls that 2 years ago many people died of hunger, and determined not to let this happen again, he decides to cancel the agreement between the fortress and the border town. Brother is even more surprised when Roland reveals that he sold the ore to the village of Salus, which trades everything that can be bought with money, making this agreement more advantageous for his people. After hearing this, Brother argues that the village of Salus does not trade ore, and that even paying in coins, the profit will be low, resulting in a loss. He emphasizes that Canto Largo has been operating for over a century in the West, surpassing Salus in development and market size, and that in the long run it would be more beneficial to keep the fortress as the only trade partner. Finally, Herman offers to buy the ore for 30% below market price, claiming that this would benefit both parties and demonstrating his skill as a negotiator. Holland then asks if what he just said would ensure that the families of the fortress would actually agree to this deal. Herman responds that he is not sure, but since he is the one managing foreign trade, he will do his best to convince the families. That said, Roland agrees, and Herman prepares to leave. But before that, he comments that it may be dangerous to travel to the village of Salus with only 2 months left until winter, suggesting that Roland adopt the Duke Ryan's perspective and be cautious with certain matters. In light of this, our protagonist explains that they will not be going to either the village of Salus or Canto Largo, but instead will build a wall for defense, transforming themselves into the new border of the kingdom of Castle Grey. Surprised, Herman recalls that any decision made by His Highness will affect the entire border population, and that if something goes wrong, there will be nowhere to flee. Roland thanks him for his concern, and Herman departs. And yes, the truth is that our protagonist is risking everything, for if his plan fails, it will all end badly. After the meeting, Roland tells Barov to proceed with the supply as planned. Meanwhile, Herman returns to his city and reports everything he discussed with Roland, mentioning the construction of the wall and that he intends to lead his subjects to defeat the beasts and transform the border town into the new border of the kingdom. Yes, the protagonist aims for much more than just being a simple territory. Upon hearing this, one of the officials stands up and criticizes Roland, calling his actions childish. The other nobles laugh, saying it is just a matter of time until that foolish prince begs for mercy. At that moment, the Duke begins to speak. He calls Boris and asks if he knows anything about the wall. Boris responds that a few days ago, Prince Roland was recruiting masons and workers, but he thought it was to fix the garden or something like that, not to build a wall. Hearing this, the Duke asks Herman if he saw the construction. He responds that yes, as before. Leaving the border town, he went to check and found that the wall is being erected near the misty forest. However, he does not know what method they are using, as the progress is too fast, although he doubts it will be sufficient to withstand the demonic beasts. The Duke then asks for his opinion. At the same time, Roland gathers the entire population for an important announcement. He talks about the meeting with the emissary of Canto Largo, who demanded the delivery of the miners. He explains that he tried to negotiate, detailing the current situation of production and requesting provisions for winter, but the request was refused. Thus, they will not receive food. As it happened during the demonic moon 2 years ago, as expected, the people panic. Roland adds that the astrologers from the Grey Castle predicted that the next winter will be longer, possibly lasting more than 4 months. This means that if nothing changes, the tragedy of 2 years ago will repeat itself in an even worse manner. Therefore, he asks everyone to remember the loved ones they lost at that time. Meanwhile, at the noble meeting, Herman claims to believe that the prince is building the wall for commercial purposes, probably to force them to trade using coins. But since he is a prince, he suggests avoiding conflicts with the royal family. He explains that even buying the ore 30% below market value would still be profitable, and it would be advantageous to allow the border town to defend itself, saving costs against the beasts. He also mentions that they could cultivate the lands between the fortress and the town. Furthermore, he reminds them that the dispute for the throne has lasted 5 years, so Roland will not remain idle, and by the end of that period, the town will be even more prosperous under the Duke's rule, who would then have the largest territory in the kingdom. Therefore, he suggests buying the ore and sending workers to help build the wall. However, the other nobles laugh and call him naive. The Duke, in turn, acknowledges that the idea is good, but states that this is the thinking of a merchant focused solely on profits and losses. Standing up, he says that he did not come this far thinking only about money and questions why he should negotiate with someone he cannot control. After all, those who do not obey must be punished. He claims that he does not care if the border town prospers or not, as it belongs to him and no one can take control, not even the prince. Returning to the people, Roland presents the provisions he managed to acquire, assuring that they will be enough for the entire winter. Finally, some good news and the promise that the tragedy of the past will not repeat itself. The people thank him, but the calm ends when he reveals that they are now enemies of Canto Largo, which immediately changes the mood, and everyone realizes that they will have to stay and resist to survive. Roland orders the construction of the wall and calls upon all who can fight, offering payment and protection for their families. He gives them a clear choice: starve or defend their home. There is not much of an option. Really. Next, along with Anna and Nana, he conducts an experiment with a candle, demonstrating that there are different gases and explaining that curiosity is essential for progress. Later, he requests materials for another experiment, but when he finally tries to relax, a woman appears from behind and puts a sword to his neck, telling His Highness not to move. During the night, Anna was observing the moon through the window. When she lies down on her bed, Roland knocks at her door asking to talk immediately. Anna gets up, opens the door, and asks what happened. And yes, now comes the context. We go back a few minutes in time, exactly to the moment when the mysterious woman appeared with a blade against the protagonist's neck. She asks him not to react, promising not to harm him. When he frees himself, Roland asks who she is and notices that she has the same symbol as the coin. He asks if she is a witch. The woman is surprised to hear this, acknowledging that he is well informed, and introduces herself as Ruiz. Roland demands to know the reason for her visit, but the witch thanks on behalf of the sisterhood for having helped Anna and Nana. She explains that she came to rescue them after hearing that they had been captured as witches. But during that week, she realized that both of them were fine and even better than any other witch. Hearing this, Roland asks if she just said she has been infiltrating for a week. Before continuing, Ruiz asks to sit down, never at ease. Roland insists on the answer, and she reveals that since she arrived in the city, she has been watching everything alongside him, seeing everything he did. Before that, the protagonist asks why she decided to show up now. Ruiz explains that she saw a servant serving him wine, but noticed that there was something strange about the drink. Roland then asks if she means that the wine was poisoned, but she responds that, apparently, the environment around him is not entirely safe. Roland clarifies the misunderstanding, but changes the subject and thanks her for saving him. Ruiz replies that it was nothing, as it was her way of repaying him for having saved Anna. Then she stands up and, looking at Roland, says she will take Anna and Nana with her. Surprised, the protagonist asks where to, and Ruiz replies that it's to the Sisterhood of Witches, a place where they are not discriminated against or persecuted. Even so, Roland believes that they will be safer with him, and assures that he will protect them. The girl acknowledges that he has no further intentions, but states that there is something he cannot do. Take them to the sacred mountain, where witches can find eternal peace. Roland then mentions that his men found traces of witches in the northern forest, and asks if they are also looking for the sacred mountain. But Ruiz refuses to answer. In response, Roland firmly states that he will not allow Anna and Nana to leave, saying that winter is coming and it will be dangerous. He invites the Sisterhood of Witches to spend the winter there, under his protection. However, Ruiz argues that even if the prince does not fear witches, there are many people in the city, and if the church finds out, it will not permit it. She questions why, knowing the danger, he does not simply let them go, and Roland replies that they are important to him. Luis then states that she needs to take Anna regardless, as she is in danger if she stays. For witches, the night of adulthood is a great trial. Anna will awaken during the demon moon, when the gates of hell open. Adulthood marks a definitive change. Those who do not awaken their powers by the age of 18 will never do so, while those who awaken will suffer extreme pain every year on the same day, caused by their magic. This pain can be so intense that it can kill them horribly, turning their bodies to smoke and leaving only a layer of charred skin. If they survive, their bodies recover in 4 or 5 days. In other words, the life of a witch is full of suffering. Besides being hunted and executed, she also mentions that many die precisely at this stage, which is why they are seen as the embodiment of the devil. In the Sisterhood of Witches, they will know how to take care of Anna and Nana. They will have a better chance of surviving, and the sacred mountain will offer them eternal peace. The masked woman tells the protagonist that they might be indispensable to his grand plans, but she asks him to give them this chance to survive. Hearing this, Roland, a bit sad, thinks for a moment, and she accepts that Ruiz will take her. She thanks him for his understanding and disappears. Roland, still confused, goes to Anna's room, saying he needs to discuss something important with her. When he enters, he tells her everything that will happen, but Anna refuses to leave, stating that she will endure the pain and wants to be by her highness's side, leaving the protagonist surprised. Honestly, who wouldn't be? He is just too kind to her. Ruiz then decides to stay, saying he has experience with this and will be able to help her when the time comes. Otherwise, if Anna cannot resist, she will suffer terrible consequences. The next day, Roland wakes up, and while the maids tidy his room, Carter enters. Roland asks what happened, and Carter reveals that Tyr died the night before after falling from the balcony. The protagonist laments the occurrence and orders that he be given a proper burial. He then tells Carter to leave and wait in the hall. As soon as he leaves, Ruiz appears. As if, by magic, silence fills the room, and Roland asks if it was her. Ruiz admits it, but clarifies that she did not kill him. When she appeared before Tyr, he decided to commit suicide using poison hidden in a tooth, and Ruiz just made it look like an accident. The protagonist comments that he knew his sister had been kidnapped and sent to kill him, then supposes that his own brothers are behind it. Ruiz suggests that he hurry and attend the meeting as soon as possible. Roland tries to refuse, but noticing that he has already finished his breakfast, he has no choice but to go. Thus, he appears before Baroff and Carter. The old man notices that he is distracted and asks if everything is okay. The protagonist reassures him, saying he is just hungry, and tells them to start the meeting. They begin explaining that due to the sale of ore at half the market price, they earned only 200 gold coins. However, deducting the expenses for the wall and provisions, only 90 coins remain. Our protagonist considers this sufficient to survive the winter, but Barov reminds him that he also announced a militia. Then, Roland asks Carter about the recruitment, and he replies that there are many volunteers, making it possible to form a group of 100 men. However, training and command are a big problem since they are just ordinary workers facing demonic beasts. For this reason, he suggests seeking support from Baron Boris to recruit knights. And yes, the protagonist is not naive, so he accepts and asks them to organize a meeting with the Baron for the next day. Later, Roland speaks privately with Barov, who doubts that Boris will help them. Roland admits that he does not expect that either, but accepted the meeting because Carter trusts him, although he acknowledges that Carter is right about the military side of things. While they play chess, Barov believes he will lose due to a lack of pieces, but Roland explains that pawns, even being the simplest, can ensure victory. He makes a parallel to reality, trusting that the people will fight to the end, even without experience, and states that he will train and equip them properly. Next, we see Roland teaching Anna how to focus her fire magic on a specific point. After much effort, she succeeds, even changing the color of the flames, but ends up exhausted. The protagonist praises her and says that what they are creating will be a weapon that will mark a new era. Later in his room, Ruiz appears again, promising to protect both Anna and Roland. As a sign of trust, she shows the scroll that Anna gave her, and says he wants to take him to the Brotherhood of Witches, and Roland agrees without hesitation. The next day, Roland and Carter visit Baron Boris to request military support. Although he recognizes the prince's courage, he refuses to help, claiming that his knights are exhausted and he does not want to risk them against demonic beasts. Instead, he offers money as a form of support. This makes Carter furious, seeing it as a lack of honor, but Roland remains calm, saying he had expected this. He accepts the money, decides to use it strategically, and understands that he cannot depend on the nobility. When Carter asks how they will train without knights, Roland confidently responds that he has his own methods. At the camp, we see Bana, who finds some friends and is surprised by their presence. They came attracted by the job offer, as they had only acted as mounted messengers, avoiding direct combat. One of them asks what will happen to the girl from the bar, Sherry, if he dies, and Bana swears he will not die, and when he returns, he will ask her to marry him. Moreover, he came to earn money and hold the wedding right there. In the stadium, everyone is told to pay attention because Roland has just arrived. Yes, our protagonist is far too important. Upon ascending, he thanks everyone who stepped forward to defend their homes, naming them as the militia of the border village. For a month, everyone will be trained and rewarded if they can overcome the challenges. The great reward is an extra egg at breakfast, and this simple gesture already motivates everyone. Roland then introduces the captain. As some already know, he is Iron Axe, the best hunter. Roland promises that anyone who stands out in training and fights bravely will be promoted to officer, regardless of their background. Then, Iron Axe takes the floor and says that the first training will be to maintain a firm posture like his for half an hour, and anyone who succeeds will earn the extra egg. Everyone is excited. He commands them to puff out their chests, hold their heads high, clench their glutes, and tighten their abdomens. Maintaining this posture proves to be much more difficult than it seemed, especially with the strong sun overhead. Even so, Van motivates himself thinking about the egg. We see that even Iron Axe is sweating until he finally gives the order to relax, and everyone collapses exhausted on the ground. No one imagined standing still would be so tiring, but at least everyone will get an egg, commenting that it had been a year since they last ate one. Iron Axe informs Carter that everyone passed the first round, and then Roland calls Carter. The recruits, worried, wonder if they will still receive the egg. Van trusts the prince's word, although his friends think a noble's word is worth nothing. They also wonder why they chose a desert man as captain, since the nobles value lineage so much. Van replies that Iron Axe is not a bad person and is the most skilled hunter. Plus, the people of the desert are in better physical shape. At that moment, Carter returns after speaking with Roland, and everyone gets back in position. He announces that, by order of the prince, everyone will receive the extra egg for their good performance. He then explains the next challenge, to maintain the posture for 1 hour. If they succeed, they will earn another egg. The young people get excited, but Carter adds that if a single person fails, everyone will lose their reward. This worries the group. One of them asks Bana if he thinks he will hold out, and he, swallowing hard, confidently replies that for 2 eggs, he would do anything. Yes, a complete exaggeration. After that, Carter goes back to Roland. The protagonist realizes he wants to say something and encourages him to speak. Carter says he doesn't want to contradict him, but doubts those people can really fight, believing they would be the first to flee in a battle. He also doesn't understand the purpose of that training, as he doubts that standing still will help to defeat demonic beasts, in addition to questioning the choice of a desert man as captain. Roland then asks if, with the traditional method, they could become good warriors in 2 months. Carter replies no, that it would take at least 5 years. Roland explains that is exactly why he isn't trying to turn them into knights or warriors, as he knows that is impossible in such a short time. Still, he assures that results will show up quickly. He also says that both Iron Axe and the witches are now part of the border village, so that is not a problem, and asks Carter to focus on the plan. Upon seeing the documents, Carter becomes confused and asks why Roland is so determined to make them learn to read and write. The protagonist responds that it's enough for them to understand orders and that he will personally speak to the responsible party. Carter comments that this makes no difference on the battlefield, but Roland asserts that a good army consists of educated people, something proven by history. Later, at lunchtime, the recruits eat with excitement, some even crying. At that moment, Carter shows up and informs Iron Axe that the afternoon training will continue until sunset, with the aim of going around the village 3 times. If everyone manages, they will earn another egg for dinner. He then leaves, and we see all the recruits running with all their strength while Iron Axe explains the rules. Anna, once again falling behind, can't take it anymore and falls to the ground. She tries to get up, feeling like she wants to vomit, swallows and falls again, completely exhausted and sweaty. She wonders if the others have arrived already, and when she lifts her head, she realizes there is no one around. Suddenly her vision blurs, and she can only think of getting up to earn the egg, until she hears someone shout her name. Next, we see the camp. Carter asks Iron Axe if everyone managed to arrive. He looks around, but then another guard appears and, after counting the present, informs that 3 are missing. Iron Axe was already disappointed, until someone alerts that the 3 are coming. Everyone stands up and he runs to observe from a distance. Everyone starts to cheer for the 3 friends. We saw Bana smiling proudly for having managed to arrive. Some run to greet them and inform Carter that everyone completed the course. He accepts the results and, at night, everyone celebrates around a campfire. Carter approaches Iron Axe, toasting to the success of the training, but also warns that there will be more training that same night. Some think they are going to faint from exhaustion, but Carter explains that it will be emergency training. Then we return to Roland, who goes to his office and finds Ruiz sitting at the table. She comments that he has worked all day and is still busy, and that she ate his bacon to keep it from getting cold. Roland doesn't pay much attention and criticizes her lack of manners with a prince. Since she was more respectful before, Ruiz then stands up, bows as an apology, and mentions that they had prepared food for 2 people. Roland simply smiles, making it clear that one of the plates was for her. While watching him work, she comments that she heard he is funding the militia and wants everyone to learn to read and write, something the nobles would consider a waste. However, Roland sees it as an investment, as this way they will understand why they are fighting, and it will be useful in the future. At the moment, they are fighting just to eat, so he wants them to comprehend the true reason for the struggle. He then asks Ruiz what the Brotherhood is fighting for, and she replies that they are just a few women trying to survive, and that is difficult enough that they do not question anything further. Roland continues working until dawn, and when he realizes it, Ruiz has already left. He then stands up and grabs an object he brought the night before, a rifle. He immediately goes to Carter and Ironhammer to test his creation. He presents the weapon as something capable of eliminating enemies from a distance. Carter examines it and asks if it's like a crossbow. Roland replies that it is slower, but much more lethal, offering to teach its use. First, they place a dark material called gunpowder. Then, they close the compartment. Next, they insert the rest with the bullet and compress it with the ramrod. Afterward, he instructs them to aim at the target, resting the weapon on the shoulder, and gives the signal to fire. The shots destroy the armor, leaving both impressed. Carter then asks how many weapons have been produced, and Roland replies that, for now, only 2, but by the time of the Demon Moon, there will be 2 more. This discourages Carter, but Roland explains that despite being powerful, he cannot give this weapon to just anyone, so he entrusts it to them to protect the people. In light of this, they both kneel, promising to meet his expectations. At the same time, in the Long Kanto fortress, the Lord of the Lands was practicing archery while Boris accompanied him, reporting everything he discussed with Roland and confirming that the wall is almost finished. He also mentions that Roland recruited a militia and, laughing, says they feed them with eggs. This catches the Lord's attention, who asks if they really have eggs. Boris confirms and explains that the protagonist bought supplies from the salespeople, but insists there is no reason for concern because when winter arrives, the prince will beg for help. The Lord interrupts him and makes it clear that even with a weak army and limited resources, he does not intend to give Holland the slightest chance. On any given day, the recruits continue training until late, as Greenheart and Brian observe this. Greenheart suggests that he join the militia, as he is sure that with his skill, he will eventually reach the level of steel axe. Brian accepts, on the condition that he also joins. Springheart comments that he cannot. Besides, just patrolling the streets with him seems enough. That said, he suggests that they continue patrolling at night while they were returning from patrol. When they entered the cabin, they found a group. Brian asked why they weren't sleeping. Their leader told Brian has a job for both of them, something that could turn them into knights. Brian is a little confused, so the man mentions that his uncle is the Duke's assistant and that he ordered them to be intimidated. The fourth prince for disrespecting the frightened Duke, Greenheart asks if they want him to kill him. The man clarifies that he does not. After all, if they did that, Duke would suffer the consequences. In addition, they must burn the barn so that they are left without provisions and are forced to beg for help from Fortress Greenheart, showing some conscience, reacts negatively, asking if they remember what happened 2 years ago when people ran out of food. At least he shows a little humanity. It doesn't matter to others. But then Brian asks how they plan to get along, infiltrate the castle with so few. The leader responds by asking if he hadn't mentioned an abandoned well that connected to the castle canals. They would use this to get to the garden. Afterwards of this, he asks one last time. Greenheart, still afraid, refuses, saying that they are crazy. He scolds them for acting like this since they want to be knights, and that is clearly not what a knight should do. Knighthood reminds everyone that a knight's duty is to fight against injustice without fear of power and to protect the weak. Brian smiles when he hears this. However, the other man gets tired of listening to him and stabs him in the back. After that, he warns Brian to cooperate, otherwise he will end up like his friend. Yes, guys, F to Greenheart. We barely know him, and he's already gone. So, they pass through the canals. As they advance, Brian recalls how he met Greenheart. Both had been chosen to patrol, then were named captains and ascended the tower together. He also remembers what was said about his ability and how he could gain the prince's recognition, since being a knight was always his dream. Even so, he was already happy just patrolling the streets with Greenheart. Yes, it's really very sad. They arrive at the garden. Brian notices some kind of machine. The leader says he doesn't know what it is and tells them to continue. Everyone goes through a door, and they arrive at the barracks. The leader asks Brian how to get to the warehouse. He responds that they must go through the door, turn around and get to the kitchen, where they will find the warehouse. One by one, they advance to avoid being seen. As they go down to the kitchen, Brian observes the guard's gun in front of him, seeing that the leader is right behind him. He waits to pass one of the torches when the leader approaches it and closes the doors. Eyes for a moment, Brian takes the opportunity to grab the man in front and throw himself down the stairs. The leader goes down to the key warehouse and finds the knight dead and Brian with the sword in his hands. With a determined look, the leader says he is going to die while more men surround him. One of them, however, remains at the door. Brian watches everyone and when he starts to fight, demonstrates that he really has talent. He doesn't just block attacks, but also dodges and counterattacks. Furthermore, he has experience in hand-to-hand combat. They all end up dead, but the leader still remains. Brian motivates himself by remembering Greenheart's words about how they plan to join the militia and become the prince's knights. The fight begins with the leader using 2 swords, but that is not enough. Brian was about to take revenge when the man who remained at the door attacks him, stabbing his shoulder. Brian realizes that he is not an ordinary guard. When he reveals his face, we see that he is Lord Viper, the famous knight of Fortaleza Canto Largo. He says that the Duke sent him, and they will use Brian as a scapegoat. Brian refuses to allow this, and they both take up fighting positions. Now the real fight begins. Brian advances, but only receives cuts. Jorge Viper was about to finish him off, but the leader asks him to finish him off personally. Viper keeps that sword and tells him to hurry. The leader holds him back and Brian apologizes to Greenheart for not being able to avenge him, but it is at that moment that Lord Ruiz appears. Lord Viper tries to hide his sword with his cape, but Ruiz dodges and cuts his arm, calling everyone filthy sewer rats and demanding that they keep their hands off their food. The next day, Brian wakes up in a bed. Beside him are Roland and the others. Brian tries to get up, but the protagonist tells him to rest, claiming to know what happened. Recognizing his courage, he thanks him on behalf of all the people Brian denies having done anything important, attributing all the merit to his friend Greenheart. Roland comments that he already knows everything, as Hill's mate, known as Scar, confessed everything when he was tortured. Yes, exactly what you heard. He was tortured, and asks Brian not to worry, promising that Greenheart will receive a dignified funeral and that he will take care of his family. Upon hearing this, Brian asks about Scar. The protagonist responds that he is still alive and that they also captured another, a knight from Canto Largo. Having said that, he asks Brian to rest, swearing by his surname that they will receive the punishment they deserve. Furthermore, he says that he has already appointed new positions for the patrol, but when the demon moon ends, they will celebrate their investiture. Brian asks what this means, and Roland replies that he will be his knight. As he leaves the room, he comments to the protagonist that it won't be easy to punish those two. The protagonist asks why, and the old man explains that Duke Ryan of Fortaleza Canto Largo is probably involved, since Rios is Boris's nephew and the other is a knight. Then they could simply pay for the pardon. At that moment, a soldier appears saying that Baron Boris wants an audience with Roland. This seems very convenient for the protagonist, so he sends Carter to fetch Nenua to discreetly heal Brian's injuries. Upon arriving at the hall, the protagonist sits on his throne and asks the reason for the visit. Boris begins by saying that he came to apologize on behalf of his nephew Rios and the Knight of Canto Largo. To obtain forgiveness, he offers 50 golden dragons. Afterwards, after hearing the entire invented excuse, the protagonist asks if he is insinuating that Duke Ryan organized all that. Boris immediately denies it, so Roland asks if it was the direct work of the captain of the Duke's guard. In view of this, Boris blames Viper, saying that the Duke is loyal to the royal family and would never allow something like this. Of course, very convenient. The protagonist responds that he will trust the Duke and considers that what his nephew did was just an individual act. Boris thanks him and asks what else he can do, but Roland responds that he himself will clean up the Duke's mess. Declares that Viper, Knight of Canto Largo, together with Rio Smith, nicknamed Scar, a member of the patrol, murdered a companion, infiltrated, and tried to kill him. Therefore, both will be sentenced to hang immediately. This leaves Boris in shock. He exclaims that God forgives the crimes of the nobility, to which Roland responds that if they want forgiveness of God, he will send them to him to receive him. A simply perfect answer. Furthermore, as Boris is administrator of the border city, he has the duty to witness the execution, something that the leaves distraught and angry. So everyone gathers to watch the execution. The crimes committed the night before are announced, and it is told how Brian and Greenheart discovered them. Thanks to them, no one will run out of food, and his sacrifice deserves all respect. Both are named heroes and knights, and a large funeral is held for Greenheart. Later at night, Roland thanks Ruiz for saving the supplies. She responds that it was nothing, and that she also needed to do that, since she eats for free. Their total humility. The protagonist did not expect so much kindness and comments that Carter continues asking if he hired any specialist for this type of situation, and he replied that this specialist will still remain in the shadows. Ruiz says that he is no better than a knight, and that, as a witch, she has her own tricks to defend herself. The protagonist knows that this could happen again, and asks if she would like to stay as a secret guard in exchange for 2 golden dragons per month and paid vacation. An excellent proposal, by the way. Ruiz doesn't know what vacation is, and he explains that they are free days in which she will continue to receive. She smiles and says she doesn't. Understand today? He executed a knight, a nobleman's nephew, in the name of God, but he also defied the divine will by saving Anna and protecting Nana. Then she asks what God means to him. Protagonist responds that God doesn't hunt witches. The church does that. They both know they are innocent, and that's why he saved her. Crime remains a crime, and the law applies to everyone. The difference lies in who the law protects, and he only does what he believes is best for his people. He ends by saying that a god would understand his actions. And if you don't understand, then you are not a god. On another day, we see Brian visiting Greenheart. He says that he fulfilled his dream and that the prince will make them knights after the demonic moon. It also says that a witch saved him. Everyone will protect his city, and he will also protect that place for him. And so, he finally says goodbye to his great friend. But anyway, if you've made it this far, comment on Say Prince, so I know you watched until the end.